Hello and welcome to the final in the series of recordings for work-based supervisors with regards to social work placements. And this presentation is concerned with placement endings and contributing to the Practice Educator Report. My name is Jennifer Simpson and I work for Nottingham Trent University, and I will be completing this final presentation. This presentation will be concerned with placement endings, as said earlier, and as part of that we're going to be considering communication with a number of stakeholders, feedback and contribution to assessment of the student, completion of required paperwork, handover, and also finishing with housekeeping. So one of the first things that needs to be completed as part of preparing for the end of a placement is actually the need to communicate with various stakeholders. One of the first stakeholders and the possibly most important stakeholder is the student themselves. So it's communicating with the student in sufficient time about planning for the end of the placement. You will need to remind the student that there is a need to plan for the closure of their cases and also to plan for the handover of work, and also to say goodbye to any clients or service users whilst managing their expectations. Additionally, it's important to remind the student to ensure that they have all the information that they need in order to complete their practice analysis. It's also advisable that you set time aside to discuss with the student the placement ending and how they will go about managing this effectively whilst meeting not only the deadlines for your organisation but also the university deadlines. We'll be looking at this in a little bit more detail in the next slide. The other stakeholder to discuss placement endings with is the practice educator. And this is regarding the fact that the student is leaving the placement and whether any further evidence is required ahead of the placement ending. If any further evidence is required, this will mean that you will have to consider new learning opportunities that can be organised and completed within the remaining days of the placement. And then the final stakeholder group in terms of communication is actually your colleagues. And it's important to communicate with your colleagues regarding the fact that the student is leaving. It may be that the student is co-working a case, the student might have responsibility for completing a key piece of work such as a chronology, or the student is running a specific group in conjunction with another team member. And therefore it's hugely important that your colleagues are told in advance with regards to the student leaving and that they also prepare for that. So when you're communicating with colleagues, what are the things that you need to bear in mind? Well, first of all, you need to check with them if they want to give any further feedback. You need to check, of course, if there's any outstanding work that the student needs to complete and what the timescale involved is. It's also advisable that you check with your manager what arrangements are being made to hand over incomplete work or cases, and also to check if the student has any equipment that you are not aware of. And then finally, it's important that you thank your colleagues for their contribution. In terms of the practice educator, as part of bringing the placement to an end, you may wish to discuss the following at least 3 weeks before the student leaves. So in terms of the Practice Educator Report, you might want to discuss the positive feedback that you've had from clients, service users and colleagues. You may wish to discuss overall challenges and difficulties and how these were overcome by the student. The level of the student's prior knowledge to the placement compared to their knowledge at the end of the placement. The student's strengths throughout the placement according to the Professional Capabilities Framework, the PCF, and again, recommendations regarding areas of development according to the PCF. Here you will see a list of all the documentation that you and the practice educator need to sign before the student completes their placement. It's important that the student is aware that they are responsible for ensuring that this is done. So you may wish to remind them very briefly, but overall it is the student's responsibility. So in terms of handover, What are the types of things that you will need to discuss with the student? Well, first of all, what existing work the student has, what cases need to be closed and those that need to be handed over, the timescales for handing over those cases and the format of the handover, plus arrangements to inform clients and service users that the student will no longer be dealing with their case. And also, it's important to discuss with the student what outstanding organisational paperwork also needs to be signed off. An important aspect in terms of placement endings is in actual fact housekeeping. And what we mean by this is to prepare a list of all the equipment that needs to be returned that was given to the student at the start or during the placement. So that might be a mobile phone, it may be a laptop or even an ID badge. So it's important that a list of all this equipment is ready at hand, and that the time and date on which that equipment is returned by the student is both agreed and made clear. You may wish to think about the shredding of confidential information, and particularly where the student may have been working from home, it's important to have a conversation to ensure that the student brings in all documentation that belongs to your organisation and shreds them accordingly. Or if they're unable to do that because of COVID restrictions, you discuss with them how they are going to dispose of confidential waste. If the student's placement has been hybrid, so they've both been working from home and also in your organizational office, then it may be that the student needs to remove their belongings, and that's going to be important. And again, there needs to be an agreed time and date for doing this. And also importantly, that if your organization has set up an IT account, this now needs to be closed. And also, very importantly, that there's an out of office message from the student saying that they have left the organisation, and if there are any further inquiries, that there is a named person that whoever receives that message they can go to. There's just one final thing to say in terms of this series of sessions for work-based supervisors, and that's a huge thank you on behalf of the D2N2 partnership for all your hard work as a work-based supervisor. It does not go unrecognised. We appreciate the work, the energy and the time that you put into working with social work students. Once again, thank you very much.